Support for On Point comes from Seed. Seed's DSO1 is a 24-strain, 2-in-1 probiotic and prebiotic engineered to survive digestion, support healthy regularity, and promote whole body health. Learn more at seed.com/public. And MathWorks, creator of MATLAB and Simulink software for technical computing and model-based design. MathWorks, accelerating the pace of discovery in engineering and science. Learn more at mathworks.com.
This is KUOW FM Seattle, KUOW Tumwater, KQOW Bellingham. It's just before noon on a Friday, which means it's almost time for KUOW's Week in Review. Here's your host, Bill Radke.
Yep, looking forward to it. Will Seattle tax the rich? And by rich, I mean people who have over a $250,000 profit on an asset sale, excluding the sale of retirement holdings or a house or small business or a large herd of cattle. And you think I'm kidding about the cattle part? I'm not kidding. Also on the show, you think the mayor of Seattle is a big deal? All of King County is going to get a new mayor soon. And although I will ask what to do about a stabbing spree, I will also ask what made you smile this week. We're looking forward to the whole show. I hope you'll stay tuned.
.48 degrees in Seattle. Today will be mostly sunny, then it's going to cloud up overnight, and we're looking at a rainy weekend. News update from NPR and KUOW coming up in a minute.
Support for KUOW's car donation program comes from local Kia dealers. Presenting the brand new Kia K4, available with navigation-based smart cruise control that can bring the vehicle to a stop in traffic. More at kia.com.
There was no appreciation of the struggling and the suffering of millions and millions of working class people. And unless you recognize that reality and have a vision of how you get out of that, I think you're not going to be going very far as a political party.
I'm Michael Barbaro. That's Today on the Daily from the New York Times.
This afternoon at 2 o'clock on 94.9 KUOW.
Support for KUOW comes from Seattle Rep, presenting Noel Coward's comedy Blithe Spirit. A writer's life spins out of control after conjuring his late wife's ghost, leading to a supernatural love triangle featuring costumes, props, and sets built by Seattle Rep's team of artisans. Starts November 29th. Tickets at seattlerep.org.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. As President-elect Trump prepares to occupy the Oval Office once again, the current U.S. role in global climate action initiatives is in question at the annual climate summit in Azerbaijan. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm addressed the gathering today. NPR's Michael Copley reports Granholm says the world will keep shifting to cleaner sources of energy, no matter who's in the White House.
Granholm touted a climate law passed under President Biden called the Inflation Reduction Act that's delivering big investments, including in Republican districts. She also said companies, along with states and cities, will keep taking steps to cut U.S. climate pollution and called on other nations to strengthen their efforts.
This is the time to accelerate, to fill that gap that may be left by leadership in the United States.
President-elect Trump says he'll adopt policies to boost U.S. production of fossil fuels, the main source of heat-trapping emissions. And activists expect he'll pull the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Agreement. Michael Copley, NPR News.
President-elect Trump's appointing his campaign communications director, Stephen Chung, to be the White House communications director. Chung worked on both of Trump's previous campaigns and worked in the White House for part of Trump's first term. The Texas Supreme Court is blocking a state House committee's attempt to delay the execution of a man convicted of killing his 2-year-old daughter in 2002. Toluwani Osibamawo from member station KERA reports the court ruled that lawmakers lack the authority to override death row inmate Robert Roberson's execution.
Prosecutors successfully argued Roberson violently shook his daughter Nikki more than 20 years ago, causing her death. But the scientific validity of shaken baby syndrome has been disputed since then. The state's highest criminal court cleared the way for Roberson's execution. The Texas House Committee on Criminal Jurisprudence issued a subpoena just before Roberson was to be put to death in October, requiring him to testify on the use of the state's junk science law in his case. The Texas Supreme Court, the highest court for civil cases, paused Roberson's execution to honor the subpoena. Roberson ultimately never testified before the state house, and the high court ruling clears the way for the execution to take place. For NPR News, I'm Toluwani Osibamoo in Dallas.
More than a week after Trump's election, bond investors say they're alarmed by parts of the president-elect's economic agenda. The bond market affects everything from interest rates to inflation. NPR's Rafael Nam has more.
Although Trump has promised to lower inflation, many bond investors believe he could actually do the opposite. Take tariffs. Trump is proposing a wide range of tariffs, and the U.S. imports a lot of things. Tariffs obviously make those things more expensive. Trump also wants to cut taxes. All of that could make the country's finances a lot worse. And they are already pretty bad. The budget deficit in the last fiscal year was $1.8 trillion, the third highest on record.
This is KUOW News. I'm Kevin Kniested in Seattle. Leaders in Seattle's Chinatown International District are calling on the city to invest more resources into the neighborhood. This after a man went on a stabbing spree last week. The 37-year-old was formally charged with 5 attacks yesterday and is suspected in 4 more. Gwen Pham is the executive director of Friends of Little Saigon. She says businesses in the CID are being forced to close over safety concerns.
I mean, I put that on our city because even though these issues have been long persisting, it took them so long to recognize that this area is dealing with a lot and there needs to be more focused investment. And I feel like it's getting to that place where it feels like it's too late.
Roland Jerome Lee, who's been charged with last week's attacks, is expected to appear in court at the end of the month. Police are looking for people who vandalized the home and car belonging to University of Washington President Anamari Kause. The campus paper, The Daily, says the vandals posted a video to Instagram Wednesday night showing them spray painting the words Free Palestine on her front door and car. They also tagged her property with phrases like blood on your hands and called her complicit in genocide. The university and President Kause have come under fire from those who are opposed to the war in Gaza and the UW's ties to certain companies, specifically Boeing, which the culprits say is the primary supplier of weapons to Israel. The university says it's using all available resources to identify and bring charges against the vandals. And get ready for a wet weekend around western Washington.
We're getting into, November, so we're having these wet systems kind of on the heels of each other. The more wetter areas are going to be the Olympics and the Cascades, but it'll definitely be another wet day across the interior.
That's Kayla Mazurkowitz with the National Weather Service in Seattle. She says in addition to the mountains getting some rain, they'll also get some snow. This is KUOW.
Leaders include Schwab, with Schwab investing themes like artificial intelligence, renewable energy, or pet passion. Over 40 themes to invest in. Learn more at schwab.com. And the Doris Duke Foundation.
Welcome to Friday. Welcome to KUOW's Week in Review. You made it, and we're going to help you. You got one more thing to do, which is in an hour-long short format, get caught up on what happened this week that you might have missed and understand it a little better. I'm Bill Radke. That's what we do here. I'm here with a panel of observers, I guess I'll say. We have from Seattle Channel, host and producer, also host of the News, Views, and Brews podcast. Mm-hmm. Welcome back, Brian Callanan.
Good to be here. Thanks, Bill.
Good to see you. We have a former Port of Seattle commissioner here and former state gubernatorial candidate, Tacoma Tribune columnist, Spokane Inlander columnist. A busy man. Thanks for making time for us.
Hey,
Bill
I'll be
Bryant.
here anytime you ask me.
Excellent. And I love that PubliCola co-founder and publisher Erica Barnett comes in hot. And she's what else has she been doing? Of course, she's listening to / watching the Seattle Channel and catching up on city business. Hey, Erica.
Hello.
Thanks for. I'll look forward to finding out what you learned. We're on YouTube, by the way, listeners. You can be viewers by just searching KUOW on YouTube. I'll pass on that. I just found out a certain almost former governor, Jay Inslee, is going to be on my year in review stage show on December 11th at Town Hall Seattle. You know, we do an annual year in review. We'll also have a person of the year who has 10 legs and a cell phone, and you have to just find out about that.
Wow.
Go get your tickets at kuow.org/events.
Is Inslee going to be like juggling or spinning plates, or what's his act?
Yeah, what is his act? Yeah, I mean, well, he better justify his stage time.
Right.
Yeah. So let's talk about the news of the week. We just last week had an election in which Washington state voters appeared to say, no, we do not want to repeal the state capital gains tax. And if statewide voters are okay with that tax, then maybe Seattle's more progressive voters would also go for it. Seattle's got a budget deficit to close. More tax revenue would mean less of a spending cut. You often hear people call for progressive taxes, so taxing the rich. So a few days ago, a city councilor proposed a 2% Seattle capital gains tax, not 7% like the state version, 2%. And KUOW reporter Joshua McNichols told us that tax proposal will probably fail.
City Council member Kathy Moore asked her colleagues to vote yes. She said the tax would raise between $16 and $51 million to help people in need get housing and food.
We live in a city in which the income inequality is continuing to grow at a rapid pace. And with our national election, we're going to see that accelerate.
But at least 5 of the 9 council members appear likely to vote no. Councilmember Rob Saka said Seattle should focus on basic government services.
Public safety, parks, potholes, infrastructure.
He said the council should revisit the bill again next year.
Erica, should Seattle tax capital gains?
Well, look, I'm not going to actually express an opinion on this for once, believe it or not. But I do think that there are some issues with this capital gains tax. One of them is its volatility. The fact that, it relies on a very small number of people living in the city of Seattle who pay more than $262,000 in, to specify what this would do, it would tax above $262,000 in capital gains, not counting real estate, things like that. So investments.
Not selling from your retirement account.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
There are a lot of exemptions.
Yeah.
So the tax is volatile because it would be paid by only a very small number of Seattleites. That said,
Sorry, Eric, it's volatile because stock markets go up and down, or volatile because people move out because they don't want to pay the tax? Or
both.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not so much that people move out because they don't pay the tax. I mean, based on, national and statewide, our limited knowledge of what has happened statewide, there is some fluctuation where people are actually more likely to evade the tax and just not pay it, according to analysis. But some people do move. But the bigger reason why it's volatile is that it's really, mostly dependent on a tiny handful of people, like 10 people. And so just like the Jumpstart tax, the super rich.
Okay.
And so just like the Jumpstart tax, which is a payroll tax that companies pay, that's mostly dependent on Amazon. We don't know exactly how dependent, but if Amazon pulls out jobs, which they definitely can do, then that tax could really go down. So that's why you see that huge range of 15 and to 16 to 51 million.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of the issue with that tax. I think
that's why some people don't like it. It's too volatile.
Well, no, I think the council is just kind of opposed to the concept. It's particularly a new council member is opposed to the concept of progressive revenue. And they say it's unnecessary because, oh, look, we have Jumpstart, this other progressive revenue source that they probably would have opposed had it been before them. But that's now being used to backfill the entire general fund of the city. And so Kathy Moore proposed this as sort of a way of funding tenant assistance and homeownership programs and food assistance.
But capital gains nationally is incredibly volatile. I mean, if you look at how much is collected by the federal government, it has real peaks and valleys depending upon what's going on with the economy. It's not just stocks and bonds. It's people who have built a company in Seattle and then sell that company. They will pay over a third if this were to go through.
But not, if I understood it right, small businesses are exempted.
Well, it's small, but it's very small.
Okay.
So if you've built a tech company and you're going public or you're selling, a third of that income is going to go to the state, federal, or now city. So it's incredibly volatile because that happens and then it doesn't. So you have that income and then you don't. And to base a new program on the funding from a capital gains tax is irresponsible.
I see a few different pieces with this, and I just wanted to make sure I added some perspective because a lot of the talk within the council, certainly Rob Saka brought it up, was this idea of timing. It's not the right time. But then at the same time, I see the flip side of it with, you brought up those election results. I mean, 64% of the people in our states basically said, yes, we're all right with the capital gains tax. When you look at the King County numbers, it's even higher than that. It's upwards of 72%. So in terms of timing, I don't think it was all that. I guess I would say it's almost politically astute of Kathy Moore to bring it up now and try to see what's happening. I'm just saying in terms of what voters are saying.
It's difficult to move out of the United States.
Okay.
It's easier to move out of a state, but still, the people who do aren't moving out. They just have residences already in other states, and they're just shifting their residence.
The volatility is about...
But in a city, it's easy to move out.
Okay.
The volatility is about 0.5%. I mean, I've read the reports on this, and so it again, historically speaking, it is limited. People are not just up and leaving Seattle or up and leaving Washington State, and then the kind of numbers that would create the volatility that we're all talking about. I do think that putting this money into new programs that are ongoing is risky. But there's a spending plan. I mean, it sounds like it's not going to happen this year. And I want to go back to Rob Saka saying that. I mean, it's very funny to me that the sort of good governance, government accountability, efficiency,
fix the potholes
faction of the council is saying. I mean, Saka said, let's revisit this every single year. That seems to be pretty darn inefficient to me, but that is his stated plan. So, maybe this will come back next year, maybe it won't.
And injecting that level of uncertainty into a tax regime is not something that will encourage people to start a new business in Seattle.
They won't.
I think the reason why it's not a good time is because the city, in many ways, is a mess. And it has a lot of money, and it has no accountability for the fact that our downtown is still falling apart. Our public safety has deteriorated. And I think there are a lot of people who are saying you have squeezed all the gold out of this goose that you're going to get.
Well, the city of Seattle went for the capital gains tax at the state level very strongly.
I know, but the people who will pay this are going to say, if you can't get your city together with the basics, don't come asking us for more money.
That's definitely a viewpoint that I've heard from the Downtown Seattle Association, for example. Talked with them a couple of weeks ago about this whole idea, and you will hear that drumbeat constantly, which is do a better job with the money that you have.
Exactly.
So I definitely hear that piece of it. But at the same time, we're seeing a pretty large structural deficit here for the city of Seattle. And I think that they're looking at some different solutions. Is this the right one? I'm not sure. But I know they're going to be talking about it. And I really know they're going to be talking about it because the new citywide council member who's coming on here, Alexis Mercedes Rink, she's very much front and center with her support for progressive revenue. And so I'm going to be interested to see how this conversation changes over the next year.
The problem is what they're not talking about. They're not saying, okay, we have this structural deficit. Rather than just going out and say we're going to tax people more, they need to be stepping back and saying, okay, what are the core responsibilities of the city? And zero-based budget this thing. Don't just take last year's budget and add more to it.
That's not going to happen at the city of Seattle. But I mean, I think to the point of they just need to focus on the basics. I mean, I think we do probably in Seattle define the basics a little differently than other areas. And one of the things that Kathy Moore, who is not a raving liberal on the council, is saying is that we have people in Seattle who don't have food. And there is an actual, hunger crisis that is brewing in Seattle. And so we need to fund that. We have
is part of that expiration of federal money, pandemic money, and now you have the Trump administration coming in saying they're going to cut off money. What are you referring to about a hunger crisis that's getting worse?
I mean, it's the fact that people are, unable to pay for food and to access food at food banks in parts of the city. But the main thing that it would pay for is direct tenant assistance for people who can't pay rent. And there is a big debate on the council about, well, what's wrong with those people, and should we send social workers into all of their buildings to figure out what the root causes are. But I think the root causes are pretty obvious to anyone who rents. It's that rent is getting higher and incomes are not keeping up. And so I will say, in general, Jumpstart, the tax was supposed to be for a lot of this stuff, and they're using it instead to pay for some of these other things. I mean, general, police, fire, whatever. It's being used as this kind of fungible, anything fund. And if they had kept it to the purposes that it was originally intended for, they would have had to make cuts somewhere.
Big cuts.
Big cuts, potentially. But since they didn't, there are needs in these areas that aren't being fulfilled, and that's kind of why this idea came up in the first place.
And that's what's interesting to me, too, for as much as you remember when Jumpstart was coming through in 2020 and when it was put in place in 2021, so many people in the business community very much wringing their hands saying, oh, this is going to be terrible for business or whatever else. And you can say whatever you want to about the impact on business, but I think you have to say straight up that is a fund that has saved the city of Seattle's bacon this time around in terms of the funding they've needed to shore up some holes in the budget. So what path are we going to take with that going forward? I'm not sure, but I do know that a fund that was roundly rejected by a lot of people in the business community 4 years ago is now very much a key to how the city of Seattle has solved its budget problems this year.
Bill, I don't know how, since we just talked about that, I wonder, Bill, I don't know how much you follow Seattle events, but are you one of those people who opposed the Jumpstart tax and now you wouldn't want that repealed because the city already has a $250 million deficit?
No, I didn't get involved in that fight at all, yeah.
Just to fact check one thing on the small businesses that are supposedly going to all have to move. I mean, I run a very small business, so I wouldn't be affected by this, obviously, but the definition of a qualified business is gross receipts of $10 million or less. So we are talking about small businesses, but not real small businesses.
Not real, but if you've got 49 employees, you're over $10 million probably. And we want to have a city that attracts entrepreneurs that will employ anywhere from 25 to 75 people. And if you're going to give 2% more, 7% to Olympia, 2% more to Seattle, why not set up in Bellevue?
I have a question about what we said at the beginning, that voters statewide seem to like the state capital gains tax. KUOW spoke to Washington's famous anti-tax initiative writer, Tim Eyman, who put some of the blame on for the fact that this repeal did not pass. He blamed this relatively new state law that says next to these anti-tax initiatives on your ballot, the ballot has a disclosure of how repeal would affect public finances. So in the case of the capital gains tax repeal, the ballot talked about how it would decrease funding for education. It would mean so much less money for the state. So Tim Eyman reminded KUOW host Libby Denkman that there were 4 initiatives on the ballot and only one of them passed.
The 3 that didn't pass all had for the first time one of these, I call them sabotage sentences, inserted into them. So I think that was really the central thing.
The opponents, I think, who were trying to defeat these initiatives would say that just gives voters more information. If the capital gains tax goes away, hundreds of millions of dollars that was supposed to go to education would be taken away. Like, that information for them is something voters should have for a transparency measure.
And you could certainly insert a sentence in there that said, this measure, if it passes, will increase the take-home pay of every taxpayer in the state of Washington. That would be accurate too. It'd be totally biased in favor of the initiative, but it is exactly the same thing.
Bill, Brian, you're looking confused. You're giving me an I'm confused look.
I'm not quite sure how it would put money in everybody's pocket.
Well, he's saying if a tax goes away, then the people who would pay that tax now have more money.
I see.
And I think he was talking about the long-term health care.
He may have been. Sure. Yeah. Okay.
Well, so do you, Bill Bryant, do you agree that these financial impact statements hurt the anti-tax initiatives, and whether they hurt them or not, are they fair, these statements that are on your ballot?
The ones that I read are misleading and undemocratic. Now, having said that, I'm not against having a fiscal impact statement. I think that is information that the voters should have when they're voting. But you got to make sure that it is objective and unbiased. Here's the first sentence for the one on the capital gains tax, since we were talking about capital gains. And these are written by the State Office of Financial Management. If approved by voters, Initiative 2109 will result in an estimated state revenue loss of $2.2 billion over the state's 5 state fiscal years. That's true. But you could also write this sentence to read, if approved by voters, Initiative 2109 will result in an estimated state revenue loss of about 1% of the budget.
So you think people see
things very
you think dollars are? You think 1% of the budget is clearer to voters than a number of dollars?
Because $2.2 billion is not in any context at all. They don't know $2.2 billion as opposed to a $70 billion budget. Now it goes on. This is the part that's undemocratic. This would reduce funding dedicated to K-12 education, higher education, early learning, and childcare. The legislature makes a decision on what to do with a 1% revenue shortfall. This is a legislature that hasn't even been elected, let alone or seated, let alone elected. And whoever wrote this at OFM is saying they have already decided where the state is going to take money away from if this fails. That is undemocratic.
But that's where the funding was geared towards.
It was geared towards, but there's no legislative obligation that it be spent there. It goes into the general fund.
Well, I mean, there's a
constitutional
constitutional obligation that education is the paramount duty of the state of Washington.
Right,
so I don't think that
if the revenue goes down $440 million, the OFM is assuming the legislature is going to cut the education budget by $440, and they won't. And it's presumptuous of the OFM to say that that's what's going to happen when the legislature hasn't even elected, let alone seated or even deliberated on this yet.
Far be it for me to step out of the weeds, but I think that most people don't read these things. It's several pages long. I had just read it for the first time in preparing for this, and I voted in the last election.
But are we just talking about, what about the couple sentences on the ballot?
Right. Well, even the couple sentences on the ballot, I don't recall which portion of this multi-page document, but I assume it's some of what Bill just read that was on the ballot.
Yeah.
I think people know what a capital gains tax is. I don't think they're confused about what that is, and I don't think that if the number was 1% of the budget, personally, I would find that immensely confusing. If I saw percentages of a number that I don't know, I would say, well, what's the number? But beyond that, I think people know what a capital gains tax is, and I think they support it. They know it's a tax on people who make lots and lots of money, and it's on something that is not, that is not income. It is passive, investment.
That's not what the Washington State Supreme Court said.
Separate debate.
Yeah.
But point being, people know what a capital gains tax is, and they support capital gains taxes in Washington State. We are a liberal overall state, and I think that we are in favor of progressive taxes because right now we have the most regressive tax system in the entire nation. Before this capital gains tax was passed. So I think that's why people voted for it. I don't think it's because they read $2.2 billion and thought, oh, that's a big number.
Oh, I think they did. They saw $2.2 billion and it's going to cut education. It's 1% of the budget, and it doesn't necessarily mean that money's going to come out of the education budget.
I don't know, Bill. I think when you put on that percentage piece, you're making a judgment there too. I really do, and because that $2.2 billion is very important to people who work in education and early child care. That's something
less
that's
than 1%.
I understand, but that's money that's been dedicated to their programs.
What if we put in both the dollar figure and the percentage?
Well,
then you're really confusing people.
I think that's the thing. I think having a fiscal impact statement is useful. I'm all for giving the taxpayers more information about what they're voting on.
Yeah. Right.
We have to be very careful and what information we're presenting and how we're presenting it so it's objective and not biased.
And who is in charge of determining that? That's the part that I don't know, but because this is happening in other states too. Florida has been wrestling with that. I don't think that's anywhere near the political temperature of what we have in our state, but same type of thing. They have a fiscal impact statement that's more than a paragraph long on some of these things, and a lot of people have been railing against that. It's making some definite judgments here. I think you're right at the root of it. People do want to know this is going to have an impact of this amount of dollars, and that's what the state was trying to do here. Was it biased in some way? I know you have your opinion, and others do too, but what really strikes me about it is everybody wants that goal, right? Let's have this fiscal impact statement so people can know how much this thing costs, and this whole idea of let's be neutral has turned into a complete political football across the country.
Okay, good summation, Brian. Thank you. That's the capital gains tax, statewide, citywide. I believe there is a challenge, and I think Tim Eyman is involved, a challenge against that. I think it's a 2-year-old law requiring these fiscal impact statements. We'll see how that goes. Meanwhile, our KUOW reporter, Joshua McNichols, said, I got the impression from him there aren't the votes. I think you were saying it too, Erica, on this city council. It looks like, for now, probably not a capital gains tax, but maybe it'll be revisited year after year. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's pause there, and we'll take a little break, and then we'll come back with more of this week gone by and what it all means. I'm Bill Radke. We've got Bill Bryant and Brian Callanan, Erica Barnett, and we're on YouTube. Come right back, won't you?
94.9 KUOW, Seattle's NPR news station. It's 12:27. Currently 50 degrees in Seattle, where the forecast calls for sun today and then rain through the weekend.
Support for KUOW comes from Horizon House, independent living for adults 62 plus on Seattle's First Hill. With over 60 interests and social groups in the arts, civic affairs, gardening, and more, there are opportunities to share passions and find friendship. Learn more at horizonhouse.org.
And from Ants Community Garage, offering bay rental with access to vehicle lifts, fluid and part disposal, specialty tools, and more. A do-it-yourself auto repair shop located in Everett and opening this fall in Seattle. Information and reservations at antscommunitygarage.com.
You're listening to Week in Review. You're watching if you're on YouTube. I'm Bill Radke with PubliCola's Erica Barnett, former Port of Seattle Commissioner and news columnist now Bill Bryant, and Seattle Channel's Brian Callanan. A couple more politics items. Number one, we, of course, talked about the election results last week. Lots of Washingtonians voted for Democrats. We had, abortion rights given as a reason for this Democratic preference in Washington state, our tech-heavy economy, college-educated voters, international trade here. We don't tend to like tariffs. Democrats swept all the statewide races, expanded their majorities in the legislature. The three anti-tax initiatives were all defeated. In Congress, all the incumbent Democrats won, including in close districts. We talked about Seattle choosing a progressive city councilor over a less progressive incumbent. Seattle passed the transportation levy. So a lot there for the Democrats. And not only that, some of the new Republicans in the legislature were opposed by a Republican PAC for having ties to what they considered to be the far right. I sent you all a piece I saw in the Washington Observer about all this. Bill suggesting that this might split your Republican Party even further. Do you buy that?
How do you split it further?
Yeah,
yeah, it's pretty.
How do you
split.
marginalize the margins?
The article that you sent around that we were looking at suggested that these elections have moved the Republican legislative caucuses to the right.
Yeah.
And in conversations I've had since the election, I don't think that's really true.
Okay.
You have the article points out that Representative Chase was elected in Spokane, and that Representative-elect Marshall is going to take the seat that was formerly held by J.T. Wilcox, who was the minority leader and very moderate, and that's moved the caucus to the right. Not really. My understanding is that Chase was a very constructive member of the caucus when he was there. He wasn't throwing bombs or trying to pull them in any particular direction. People who are in the caucus now have talked to Marshall, and while he is a very sort of Trump-type person, again, he's coming across, at least right now, as being someone who wants to be a constructive member and not go off on tangents. So if that bears out, I don't think you're going to see this shift that's been predicted. And on the opposite side, Jesse Young, who was a very right-wing Trump, kind of pulling people in different directions, was defeated.
Okay.
So you have him out of the caucus. You have two people who are saying that they want to work. But I think the real story here is what happened in the 14th. The 14th is over by Yakima.
Yeah.
And it was redrawn to provide a majority district. And the Democrats drew it in a way that they thought would lead to a flip, because that's always been held by Republicans, and that it would lead to a Democrat majority in that legislative district. Two Republicans, both female, Gloria Mendoza and Deb Manieres, were both elected. So now in that caucus, you're going to have two people with a very different perspective. So I'm not thinking this is a big shift to the Trumpy right in the state house.
I feel like it is a distraction, though. I mean, when you look at the opponents there and how they were essentially fueled by a lot of the rank-and-file Republicans who are in the legislature right now, they put together PACs to try to keep these people out. I just think they're trying to avoid the distractions that, again, you look at Marshall. This is someone who is had trouble with vaccine mandates and things of this nature. And I think there's some concerns there that certainly even Republicans at the state level have there. I think that's the concern. Is it going to turn into a distraction? Is it going to turn into something where we start sinking into culture wars when the state has some better things to do? I think that's the piece out there. And like you say, can the Republican Party be split any further? This is a challenging time for the Republican Party in our state. I think everyone has to take a clear look at that, other than I would say in the U.S. Congressional District in the 4th, where Dan Newhouse was able to hold on to his seat. The man who actually voted to impeach Trump held on to his seat there. So that's the U.S. Congress level. But looking back at the state level, I guess I'm just seeing these seats and these two pieces here, the two seats you mentioned, as distractions. And I don't think the state Republican Party needs that right now.
Erica?
One of the things that the story mentions about Marshall, and I am not an expert on, Eastern Washington or the state GOP, except insofar as I've been listening to people like Chris Vance, former Republican, talk about the need for the Republican Party to get its act together for what feels like a decade now. But the story talks about how Marshall was the founder of the Washington chapter of the Three Percenters, which is an extremist right-wing group. And so, I think that maybe that's a mere distraction, but I think it also speaks to the fact that this is the Republican Party now. And to suggest that Washington State is immune from this, or that these extremists coming into, the state polity in increasing numbers and into the legislature in increasing numbers is not a big deal. I think that's closing, for the Republicans, that's closing their eyes a little bit and sort of longing for this Dan Evans past where we had moderate Republicans, dominating in the state. And the fact is, it's turning into a Democratic Party that has a lot of ideological diversity and a Republican Party that has virtually none, and the moderates within that party.
I don't think so.
The moderates within that party.
least,
if I can just finish real quick. Are increasingly, sort of shouted down and out, and I think will be eventually outnumbered by these right-wing extremists.
No, I was going to say that I'm not sure that that's true when you get down and look at specific races. Paul Harris down in Clark County, very moderate Republican, easily moved up into the Senate. And so he's going to be a very constructive, thoughtful member of the Washington State Senate. And you don't have any real right-wing people moving in there that I'm aware of. So you can point out examples. And if Chase and Marshall are not following through on what they're saying they're going to do and are not collaborative and do want to pull us in a different direction, then it's going to be an issue.
But how do we have an atomized Republican Party in Washington, or not atomized? How do we have a sort of a Republican Party in Washington State that is somehow independent of what's happening everywhere else in the entire nation? I don't believe that Washington does not exist within this nation, and I think it is foolish to suggest that. Even as it's foolish to suggest that like the Seattle City Council can prevent Trump from coming in and raiding. And deporting people. I
didn't say it was going to be divorced or exempt from what's going on in the country. What the article said is that this election pulled the caucuses to the far right. And I'm not sure when you really look at individual races that that's what's happening.
I just wonder, too, I think back to the governor's race, too. That was a race where the state Republican Party, at least at the beginning, Semi Bird was the candidate. That was the big push, and that's what everyone was yelling for at the convention there. You remember that from a few months ago. And I think that finding that moderate candidate, which I think that Dave Reicher is trying to position himself as, it didn't sell. It didn't click with that base of people that were further to the right for sure, and it didn't click with the rest of the state either. It didn't come across. That was a big challenge for the Republicans. Trumpism is.
Well, you have a party that isn't focused on winning.
Why do you say that?
Well, they endorse Simi Bird for governor.
Right.
If you're really serious about winning and taking back the governor's mansion, you don't endorse someone like Simi Bird.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll see, as you said, in a different context. The legislature hasn't even been seated yet. So we'll see what happens.
Right.
Before we take a break and leave politics for a sec, this is the longest-serving county executive in King County history is done. Dow Constantine's done this job for 15 years, and his statement essentially said it's time to move on. First of all, anybody know more than that?
Well, I mean, I
he's
think
very
that-
successful.
I think it's been known that he's not planning to run for re-election by, certainly by insiders and people sort of peripheral to insiders like me. I mean, this is not a surprise. I think he's stepping aside so that there can be, a race most likely between Claudia Balducci and Girmay Zahalai, who are both on the King County Council. I mean, it's not a surprise. I do think, it's worth kind of thinking a little bit about his legacy because he was there for so long.
Right.
And he had a lot of influence over sort of both policies of the county and just kind of the political, tone and bent of the King County Executive's office. I mean, he, talked about closing down the youth jail, didn't happen.
Didn't
talked
happen.
about closing down the downtown jail, didn't happen.
Homeless emergency.
Right.
The homeless emergency tried to expand a shelter in Soto. That was sort of shouted down by activists, including current City Councilmember Tanya Wu. But he also they passed Health Through Housing under him, which funds shelters. The public health department, has made progress on harm reduction on opiates, I think to the consternation of Republicans on the county council. There's just, he did a lot. And his most recent thing, to wrap up, was this idea of getting rid of the CID, Chinatown International District Station, for Sound Transit and turning it into two stations, one at Pioneer Square and one in Soto. And the reason he did that is to move the entire county apparatus down south and build this sort of like residential, commercial, like new neighborhood where the courthouse currently is in Pioneer Square.
Yeah.
Who knows if that's going to happen? But I mean, it was a big swing. And got at least the first part of it done.
Does that mean it doesn't happen now? Because if he's at the helm of that idea?
I think there's some momentum for it at this point. I mean, we'll see. I think that station decision is really the key.
Yeah.
And once that happens, once you kind of abandon the CID and open up this station where nothing really is down in Soto, you got to put something there.
Okay. I guess I'm looking forward to whoever is our next county executive and how they're going to carry the torch. Those issues of homelessness and incarceration. Transit is definitely one too, but homelessness and incarceration feel like really big ones to me because we're looking at an organization, the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, that's had such a shaky start to it. Dow Constantine started it up right before the pandemic and was really trying to get this off the ground. What does a new executive do about that? How does the executive guide that group going forward and try to get more buy-in from other cities around the county, which very simply hasn't happened to any broad extent? And then looking at the incarceration piece, I've just been very interested to look at how the city of Seattle feels like they're using a few more of those incarceration opportunities, if you want to call it that, or abilities to incarcerate. I know there's been some back and forth between the city and the county with regard to how effective that incarceration is for low-level offenders like misdemeanor offenders. So I think there's a bit of tension there. So how a new executive handles those issues, I think, is going to be very telling, and that's something that I'm going to be paying really close attention to because I think how they navigate that piece is going to be very important for the county.
Okay, and nobody knows what Dow Constantine's going to do next, huh?
He says he's going to stay involved with politics, and he has such a huge background with that. Student body president at UW way back in the day. I mean, he's just been connected to the Democrat machine here for so long. It's not that people wouldn't give him a job somewhere. I'm pretty sure of that, but I'm not sure. But he has said that he wants to stay in politics. It might be in a more advisory role, if I had to guess.
I think, too, I mean, one quick thing about the county versus the city, there's such, I mean, look at the tenure of Dow Constantine, 15 years.
Right.
We never have mayors that last more than
Six
2
mayors
terms.
during his time.
Yeah. And so, I mean, whoever fills those shoes, I mean, it's big shoes to fill. And, and also he's got a lot of institutional knowledge, both surrounding him and just personally. So we've got a very sort of chaotic city council right now. I mean, it's a big position, even though it's kind of low profile compared to the stuff the city gets up to.
Why did he last so long in the sense of, I remember there was such backlash against various Seattle mayors and city councils. And I mean, it wasn't like he didn't take any woke positions. He wanting to close the juvenile detention center, and
that was after huge protests against him because
Yes.
he didn't want to. I mean, he pivoted, I would say, on that when things kind of, the political wind started shifting. Not to. I mean, I think he's been very effective, but I think that his position's also changed over the years.
But I think of the county as being more conservative as a whole than the city of Seattle, and not so. He didn't seem to pay a price for it. There was a bruising time between the pandemic and the vaccine mandates. He was very associated with the King County Public Health Department, all that stuff. How come Dow Constantine just kept on winning?
I always feel that locally there's more focus on the Seattle mayor in our region, and that city government piece rather than the county government piece. Not that they don't both do very important things in our community, but it's a little more difficult for people to maybe pin down, okay, this is something the city needs to be doing, and there's a lot of 39 cities across King County, and they all have different needs there. And I feel like that's that first line of defense that people most often go to. What's my city going to do for me? And that, I'm not saying the county is left out of that, but I just really feel like the political focus of so many people in our region, and I know in terms of covering it myself, I end up covering a lot more city issues just because that's been my focus over the past several years. But I feel like that's almost a general thought, too, that people pay more attention to their city governments than they do the county government, maybe.
And there's no reporters on the county full time anymore either. There used to be. Not very many, but there were. I mean, I remember Keith Irvin, it just isn't, it doesn't get the kind of coverage. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, I feel like. But I mean, the county is incredibly important. I mean, they pass a lot of levies, a lot of the stuff that people talk about the most, like addiction, homelessness. Those are largely county issues. Public health is a county issue, no matter how much, the city of Seattle sort of flails and screams about it. It's the county that's doing that funding and implementing most of those programs. So, we should be paying more attention to the county. but yeah, it's hard when there's not a lot of infrastructure to report on it.
Bill, I wanted to ask you, you worked as a port commissioner when Dow Constantine was executive. What did you have some thoughts about? I mean, what it means for him to step aside, what it means for the county?
Well, it's not, as we've been talking about, it's not a hugely high-profile position compared to the mayor or the city council in Seattle. You don't have a lot of unincorporated King County, so people tend to go to their cities and their mayors as opposed to look to the county. There are big issues like homelessness and public health, but short of a pandemic, public health gets no attention. And when people are talking about some of the other issues like homelessness, again, they're going to be looking at their city. So I think that when we now have an opportunity to define what the King County Council and the King County Executive ought to be doing, what's their vision for the county, and if it's pretty much we're going to be low-key and keep everything sort of happy and not draw too much attention to ourselves, I think we can expect a pretty low voter turnout when this election comes around.
Okay, I don't know what paperwork's been filed, but I've seen that Councilmember Claudia Balducci is in, whatever that means officially. I've heard Councilor Gurmai Zahalai is probably
strongly considering
in,
it,
right?
yeah.
And we'll see who else runs. And you'll have a decision to make there if you're in King County. We're going to take a break. We're not finished with the week of news here on Week in Review. We will be right back after this.
It's 12:45. This is KUOW FM Seattle, KUOW Tumwater, KQOW Bellingham. While you are listening to Week in Review, think about how KUOW's programming enriches your understanding of your community and your state and your world. You can play a vital role in sustaining KUOW by donating shares of stock. It's a win-win because when you donate shares of stock, you'll receive tax advantages while supporting public radio. Learn more at KUOW.org.
Support for KUOW comes from Third Place Books. Middle grade author Shannon Messenger presents the latest book in her Keeper of the Lost Cities series on Tuesday, December 3rd at 6:30 p.m. Tickets available now at thirdplacebooks.com.
And from UW Medicine, where the same doctors caring for patients are also advancing medical research and teaching the next generation of physicians. More at uwmedicine.org. UW Medicine, a higher degree of healthcare.
You're listening to KUOW's Week in Review. You can watch the show on YouTube. I'm Bill Radke with news columnist and former Port of Seattle Commissioner Bill Bryant, and Brian Callanan from News, Views, and Brews podcast and Seattle Channel, and PubliCola co-founder and publisher Erica Barnett. Some stories we haven't gotten a chance to mention yet. Seattle Police Sergeant David Sullivan was parked near 12th and Jackson in the International District when a crowd started screaming about people being stabbed. Sullivan chased a man until the man laid down.
And so I was pretty confident that things were being handled in my immediate location. But then I was listening to the radio and I hear, I've got one over at 12th and Jackson. I've got one over here, one over there. And so I'm starting to get my head around the scope of how serious this attack was.
Yesterday, prosecutors charged a man in connection with 5 stabbings, and the man is suspected in 4 other stabbings in the area. There was another attack the same day, but the Seattle Times reports that one appeared to be an unrelated robbery. Mayor Harrell's office says the city is increasing law enforcement resources and patrols, holding those who cause harm accountable, adding new lighting and environmental design improvements, and deploying closed-circuit TV cameras and a real-time crime center, which will provide more tools to prevent and solve crimes in the Chinatown International District. Erica, do you think surveillance cameras would prevent people from getting hurt?
No. This is something that is proposed in the budget, and so it's not. I'm looking now at the press release. I wasn't able to go to this event this morning, but surveillance cameras are going to go up kind of all over hotspots in the city, all over downtown, up in on Aurora, and they have not been shown. There are lots and lots of data on surveillance cameras. They don't typically prevent crime, and they don't typically help in solving crimes, except for they have been shown to be effective at car thefts in the immediate vicinity of the cameras. So if a camera sees somebody stealing a car, it does help with that. I don't think it's going to prevent
Do they dispatch
crime.
a cop? Does an alarm sound and flashing lights on the camera? What happens?
Well, the idea is somebody's watching it in real time.
Real time.
That's the real-time crime center.
Right.
Yeah.
So they're gonna spend a lot of money, $10 million, I believe, on this in the first year, and so. I don't think it's going to be effective at preventing crime. This sounds like it was a random, violent person who was sort of rampaging through this area. And I don't believe that they would have stopped had they known that a CCTV camera operated by the city was on them. There's cameras everywhere run by businesses, and so
But with
now,
the real-time crime center, isn't there a chance that would have been seen just like a car smash and grab and someone intervenes before?
It sounds like there's a cop right there and people still got stabbed. I mean, that's just not how time works. I mean, you can't just, you can't be on the scene. You can't go back in time and stop something from happening like that. And so it sounds like there was a very quick response, which is good.
Thanks to a cop being there.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, if there's somebody at the real-time crime center downtown, it's not as though they're going to. I mean, that's still a time-intensive thing to get out there. Same as responding to a 911 call. You're there in 7 minutes. It's
so
over.
More cops would prevent violence.
I think there's more to it.
I'm not
Bill.
taking that gotcha, Bill.
No. I think there's more to it because in reading what the mayor's talking about with this downtown activation team, it's not just cameras. It's teams of people. It's police. It's groups like We Deliver Care, which are sort of on-the-ground social workers that are reaching out to people who are in need to try to prevent issues from happening before they happen. So I think it's important to point out that, yes, police are part of the answer, but there's other pieces to this too. And I think the mayor's office has realized that, and they've put out some data, at least in this press release, that seems to indicate they've had some success with some of this concentrated work in some downtown neighborhoods, like down on 3rd Avenue, et cetera. Can they replicate this and pull this across the city? That's always been the question.
But did they just push stolen goods and drug markets from 3rd to Little Saigon or wherever?
That is always the concern.
And if so,
they absolutely did. I mean, even Tanya Wu. I know I'm bringing her up a lot, but she represents the whole city, but is very concerned with Chinatown and has talked about that explicitly. I mean, of course, like drug markets don't go away. I mean, they just move. And so, that definitely has happened with 12th and Jackson, and they're doing these emphasis patrols and all this stuff. None of this stuff this is kind of what he's announced today was kind of a consolidation of a bunch of stuff that's in the current budget that we've written about before. And that Brian has talked about before, too.
Wouldn't the people of 12th and Jackson like to have the problem just moved around from one place to another? Like, move it from one place to another, at the very least, so that some other place is dealing with it for a moment until it gets moved back here.
Decades and decades of these exact same identical sites being the sites where this stuff exists. And so
there's only two places to move it around.
Well, no, I mean, there's other places. But, I mean, it's like saying, there's going to be CCTV on Aurora from 85th all the way up to 145th and areas around it. Tremendous investment in cameras just looking at people's neighborhoods all the time. And if the goal is to end sex work on Aurora and end sexual exploitation on Aurora, I don't think that cameras are going to be the magic bullet that fixes that problem, and that satisfies neighbors, because this has been a problem for decades. And same thing with Third and Pine, and same thing with 12th and Jackson. And so I think we're engaging in a little bit of magical thinking if we think throwing money at a problem and putting cameras, on everybody's neighborhoods is going to be the solution.
I do want to bring it back just to that other issue of cameras are a piece of this. There have to be other investments here, and I think the city is making some of them in terms of this outreach work that's going on, but that's the part that I'm paying really close attention to. It's okay, this public safety investment has to encompass more than let's make some arrests, because I know a lot of people have been eager about that. What about that work that's going on to help people who are in need, who are involved in sex work, get them out of the trade, which is a very challenging process. But I think that's the piece where people are going to be looking to the council for that in the future, because if it's just a crime and law enforcement type of situation, it doesn't solve the problem.
But I just want to underline that you are saying, I hear you saying cops, and in your case, Brian, surveillance cameras are part of the solution. Because there are people saying it's not part of the solution.
That's what the city's saying. Yeah.
Well, and this rampage would have been a lot worse had we not had an officer right there. If we had to wait another 10 or 12 or 15 minutes.
And people helping him, pointing him to where he needed to go.
So the presence of officers in communities, visible presence, whether they're walking the streets or in a patrol car, is a key part of this.
Well,
and I think that's what you have.
This is an unusual situation where you had an officer right there. I don't think that the solution, actually, whether you think it's a solution or not, the city doesn't have enough money to have a phalanx of officers at every place that they think crime is going to happen. They do emphasis patrols. It's going to cost $10 million in overtime for emphasis patrols next year. And that's
what about cameras instead of cops being everywhere?
Yeah, you're going to have an actual physical presence.
Then it feels like it starts to, I've been to cities like that. And St. Louis, for example, has cameras everywhere, bristling with cameras. And I call them cops on a stick, because it's a stick, it has a light on it, there's a camera. It doesn't prevent crime. It just makes us, honestly, to me, it makes a city feel unsafe, because I'm like, well, there's no human beings around here. There's just this stick with a camera on it. And second, why are these cameras everywhere? Something really bad must be happening. So it makes a city feel deteriorated, unsafe. Much more worn down than, a little bit of graffiti on a wall does. In my experience, in my opinion, that's how it feels to me. I wouldn't want to live in St. Louis, or a part of any city that just has cameras everywhere watching me at all times.
And I think with this story too, it's important to point out that it's pretty rare that the Seattle Police Department has rank and file officers talk to the media. And that's what happened with Sergeant Sullivan here, who clearly did some heroic things in preventing some people from being in a worse situation medically and actually catching this person. So I think the city of Seattle is trying to put its officers, front and center, as you were saying, Bill, and trying to respond to this. But again, I think there's a lot more to this approach that we'll have to see how it plays out. But I'm with you, Erica. I have heard a lot of this over the past several years. I remember Mayor Murray, more than just about a decade ago, the 9.5 block strategy, really trying to concentrate.
Tim Burgess before that, saying, we need to do hotspot policing in these spots.
Right, which makes sense to people. It's like, okay, we're going to eradicate these things in these hotspots, but I guess it's not that simple, and that's why it's taken decades for us to continue to wrestle with this problem, I suppose.
Okay, let's get through just a few stories, because we're almost done with the show here, that I haven't had a chance to mention. Woodland Park Zoo red-breasted goose died of avian flu. First infection at the zoo. Apparently the goose and its flock live in a behind-the-scenes area, so they had no contact with the public. I didn't know there was a behind-the-scenes zoo, but I guess that's where they keep the unicorns. But the birds will now be quarantined. The walk-through aviaries are closed, and the penguin feeding experiences have been canceled. I know of 11 known human cases in Washington so far, human cases of avian flu. No evidence yet that the flu's passed from person to person. If the virus does mutate like that, some people are going to want a new vaccine. Who knows how that would go over these days.
Oh, boy.
Speaking of vaccines, the state health department reports 1,193 cases of whooping cough this year compared to last year's 51. This year, 28 people hospitalized, including 12 infants. Vaccination rates have fallen. And it's confusing because the word whooping sounds kind of fun.
Whoop it up.
Right? Whoop it up. And there's the DTaP inoculation and the Tdap, and neither one has a W in it. But we'll see how King County responds. See if we vaccinate at rates any differently than anybody else.
Pertussis is the word
pertussis
we're
is
working
the
with. Yeah.
Official word. Tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis. People are looking for someone who vandalized the home and car belonging to UW President Anamari Kause. The campus paper, The Daily, says vandals posted a video to Instagram showing them spray painting the words Free Palestine on her front door and car, tagged her property with phrases like blood on your hands, and called her complicit in genocide. University and Kause have been criticized over the Israeli war in Gaza and the UW's ties to weapons suppliers, including Boeing. In other Boeing news, the company has issued layoff notices, including to engineers in the SPIA union. Boeing has said it will cut its global workforce by 10%. We don't know how many of those will be in the Puget Sound area. I could go on, but I want to make sure to save some time in case anything made you, for God's sake, smile this week. Anything?
I had one. I saw it in the Axios newsletter that this date in 1805, Lewis and Clark finished their expedition and were in the Pacific, got to Seaside, Oregon, and I've been with my family there so many times. It made me smile because I've been out there on that beach and said, hey, kids, this is where Lewis and Clark, it's right here. We're right in the spot. And it's basically like, Dad, can we go inside? It's really rainy out. I'm like, no, we're going to stay
That's
here.
what they said.
Yes, no, we're gonna stay here and boil water for salt like they did back then. How fun is that? So anyway, that made me smile. Yeah.
I was in Atlanta for a conference this week, and there were quite a few things at that conference that made me smile, working on addiction solutions. But the coolest thing was it was at the aquarium there, and they let us go backstage for a few minutes and actually look at the beluga whales that they have there that are swimming around in this enormous tank, and give us all these statistics, like 27 feet long, and have a wingspan of whatever. Mm-hmm. We saw some turtles. It was really cool, and it made me realize that I love an aquarium, and I'm always reminded of that when I go to one, and B, it made me really excited to go to the new Ocean Pavilion here, which I have not gotten a chance to do yet. So that was making me smile. Just hanging out with the belugas and the turtles made me just reminded me that we have an aquarium here.
Yes, we do.
That people should visit.
I have a marine smile as well. I went to lunch on Wednesday with Jacques White, who is the executive director of Long Live the Kings, probably the preeminent salmon recovery organization we have here in the Northwest. And Jacques told me that in the areas where Long Live the Kings is very active and has infrastructure and projects on the ground, the fall coho and fall chum runs are coming back strong.
Okay, that is smile-worthy. We are all out of time. Former Port of Seattle Commissioner and columnist, Tacoma Tribune, Bill Bryant, Seattle Channel and News, Views, and Brews gives us Brian Callanan, and PubliCola co-founder Erica Barnett. Thanks for being our show this week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Support for KUOW comes from Zoom Care. From urgent and emergency care to preventative primary care, Zoom Care has 20